I'm recording.
Okay, we are live. Call to order this regular monthly meeting of the Peabody Public Library Board of Trustees for April 13th, 2022. We'll note there is a quorum, and before going to our regular agenda, we have some out-of-town speakers that we would like to hear from. And so I don't know if Mary, if you need any more introduction, or
I think we're good.
folks want to give us, I don't coordinate anything, but I'm going to take over. And I assume one or both of you have made quite a drive, so we will get you going on the road.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you for having us here. We'll go ahead and start with the Baker-Tilly presentation that just talks about specific finances of the Peabody Public Library. So we want to turn to the first page. This is a picture, a chart of your existing debt service. And as you can see in all of your debt matures in 2024, but you do have a bit of a step down from 2023 to 2024. And that really gives us an opportunity now to take a look at issuing more debt. And we can even do that as soon as this year, based on some of the debt service and net assessed values that we'll go into a little bit later. So if you'd like to turn to the next page, this is just a numerical representation of the library's existing annual debt service. As you can see, the same thing, all of the debt matures in 2020. So on page 3, this schedule illustrates the library's general obligation bonding capacity. And since you have no general obligation debt outstanding at this time, your capacity is just a little bit over $5 million. Now, this calculation is based on the certified net assessed value of the library. It's 1/3 times 2% of the NAV. General obligation debt can be issued in the name of the library. So if you decide that your projects, you need to finance more than this $5 million that's listed here, you would have to then issue what we call first mortgage or lease rental bonds, form a building corporation, the same kind that you have with the 2017 bonds. But those bonds, the lease rental bonds, are not subject to this $5 million limitation. Really, the differences are that the general obligation bonds are a little bit easier to issue. We can do that a little bit faster if needed because we don't have as many steps, and Kristen will cover all of those later on. But those are kind of just some high-level differences between the two. So if we turn to the next page now, I put together just a couple of illustrations for you to consider for tonight. There's nothing here that you have to do. You can do more or less or anything in between, but just wanted to give you sort of an idea of what's available to you at your current debt service capacity. So the first option is $795,000, and these are both general obligation bonds, by the way. You could expect to get proceeds of $670,000 from that, and that takes into consideration things like issuance costs, underwriters' discounts. You have to pay your municipal advisor and your bond counsel, and there might be some other people involved in the bond issuance. This repayment term is for 5 years, and we go through the estimated interest expense, and keep in mind that the numbers here, especially the rates that we're using to make these calculations, are estimated. Actual rates could vary by the date of the sale, just depending on what the market does. So these are just kind of, we do our best to do forward estimates, but sometimes that crystal ball just doesn't work right. So just wanted to give you that. When we look at the estimated maximum tax rate, that's the second from the bottom row. That's based on the maximum annual payment, the $246,000. $6,000. But also keep in mind, as your debt service falls off, your taxpayers won't see any impact. And we structured these, both of these options to avoid any taxpayer impact. We're keeping you at the same level of debt service that you currently have. And again, you know, these are the estimated tax rate is based on your 2022 net assessed value. So if that number should increase or decrease, that could have an impact on your tax rate as well. So here's a chart of option one, and as you can see, if we issue in 2022, we can begin paying some debt service next year, and then pay that $795,000 off by 2027. You can see 2023, there is a little bit of a bump in the debt service, but you'll have some operating balance available that actually you'll be required to spend down. So we're just kind of using that up rather than having your tax rate decrease even more because of that required spending. And then on page 6, we look at just the numbers behind the chart. You know, how that looks, how that fits into your current structure. So the next option is option 2, and that's the 1.695 million in borrowing. And that would give the library about 1.5 million in proceeds to use for projects. We've structured this to go out for 10 years, again, so we can maintain that same level of debt service that you currently have. We also, again, see that little bump in 2023 that we will use the operating balance spend down to offset any tax rate impact. And then on page 8, again, the numbers behind the chart. So, you know, the key thing here is that as you kind of consider issuing debt, you'll need to kind of, you know, we've shown you here that there is some room for you to do that. But, you know, do you have projects? Do you have things to spend the money on? Do you wish to spend more than the 1.6 or less? Or so, you know, those are some things that will have to be open for discussion. So do you have any questions or any questions I can answer for you?
So the 1.6 million that we could borrow.
Yes.
And just in looking at like page 5, for example, showing that we would then have that bump up on the repayment
Yes.
in 2023. But what if we made it and issued in 2023 and started repaying in 2024? Would that impact the amount we could borrow, 1, and 2, would it change, we wouldn't have that bump?
Well, the bump is actually to your advantage, to be honest, because the library maintains, is allowed to maintain a certain amount of operating balance in their debt service fund. And as your debt matures, that balance decreases. If you don't use it on new debt service, then you'll be forced to use it toward the existing debt service, and your tax rate will go down.
Okay.
So you should take advantage of that bump.
Okay, but would it impact the amount that we could borrow if we borrowed in 2023, started paying in 2024?
You could probably borrow more, but again, I think it would be.
We should take advantage of it to do it.
Yeah, you should take advantage of it, and should you decide that you have more projects, you know, and that's something that we'll work with Mary on before we really finalize all of these numbers. If you want the $1.6 million this year, but then maybe in next year or in 2 years, you think you're going to have some more projects coming up, we can certainly structure these bonds differently so that you have room to add debt service on and without impacting your tax rate. Now, that would mean stretching the term out a little bit and probably have some extra interest expense, but it gets your goals accomplished.
What is the time frame? How long would it take to go from making the decision of moving to on debt to actually closing on?
Well, I'm going to let Kristen handle that because she's the
Foreshadowing.
she's the one that makes sure that all of the legal steps are done, so.
It's because everybody always loves lawyers. The answer is it depends on what
I'm
type
married
of.
to one.
Yeah, so am I.
You
So,
know, you hear it all the time. Because if you're, for example, going to do a maintenance project, let's say you want some new shelving, some new furniture, you need a new roof or an HVAC, we could start right now. If you're going to do an addition or you want to do a build out to have more meeting space or a teen area, that takes longer because it takes your architect, right now they're saying that they want 6 to 8 months to draw. Okay. So if you do those, I would say more maintenance-like projects, we can go very fast. But if you do something that requires a lot of architectural or engineering design, we usually say we want to back you up at least a year. And I'm going to talk about some things. Our legislature hits us each year at our libraries, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the other hoops that we have to jump through. And so when I meet with libraries, I always tell them, you're never too early, even if we're years in advance, because there's a lot of politics to it now. So I think to transition then from what Lisa was talking about to the legal side of it is that there are so many politics involved. When we issue bonds, which we'll talk about in a minute what those are and why we even have to do it, we have two areas in law that we have to concentrate on. So we have state law, all of your library board meetings and your publications and fiscal body approval, county council approval, those sorts of things. On the other side, we have federal law. So what my presentation today is going to be over is state law because that's what impacts you the most. But before we start, what I always like to tell our libraries and our other clients is that from a federal law perspective, when you are issuing tax-exempt debt, it has to be for a tax-exempt purpose. So that means it has to be a capital expenditure. So when you're looking through like what do we need, everybody always asks me, well, what about our maintenance contracts with our HVAC or, you know, all different Kinko's, whatever, any maintenance contract. Can I get those out of my LERF? Can I get those out of rainy day and pay them with debt service? No. It has to be capital. So equipment, bricks and mortar, we can do technology. If it's the hard wiring, we can't do software. So I want you to keep that in the back of your mind as we go through this and as you all pull together with your facility needs. So to start, I'm going to start on page 3. I like to start really broad because were any of you on the board when we did the last project? No.
weren't you a part of the build-out in 2010? Okay.
So you've been through a bond issue before, but
That's a brand new bond issue, right?
that was,
Yeah, it was. I thought it was. I thought we financed.
No, we refinanced it
It was a re
2016.
You weren't here.
I thought Chris was only on once before I was, that's why I didn't
maybe he joined at the lucky time.
know. Well, if you haven't seen recollection of it, your mind is younger.
No.
More
I
agile.
do remember the bond talk, but I was not in the whole process as an teacher. That's true.
Okay, we'll go on anyway.
So what I always like to start with on page 3 is this team, like what it consists of, because you all have been used to, on this current library board, doing projects probably from your LERF or your rainy day fund, right? Or using money from Friends of the Library or other like neat projects you have. When you do one of these projects, our state law requires you, if you're over $150,000, to publicly bid. So that requires an architect and an engineer often. And that right there is a lot of your timing issue. Once you decide what your project is, you have to interview and hire your architect that's going to help you. So that also sometimes takes a few months. A lot of our boards, as Lisa will tell you, they want to interview 4 or 5 architects, which we are more than happy if you decide to move forward to give you a list of architects that have worked with all of the surrounding library districts. But in addition, you have Lisa and her team, the financial advisor, and not only do you get to work with one attorney, but you get to work with 2. So you get to work with bond counsel and your local attorney. And then there are people or corporations that come in and buy those bonds, which are called underwriters. So I just put this here so you could see, as Mary's talking to you about a bond issue, as she starts to talk about different parties that we've been talking about, this is why. It takes a whole village to do a bond issue. But on the top, as this presentation is going to get into, you also have your voters and your taxpayers, and 4 appointed boards. You have your county council or your city council. So we'll talk through that. Pages 4 through 7 are really, if you ever need to fall asleep really quickly, we kind of describe what all of us do in those parties. I'll tell you that our role is to help work with your local council to draft all of the resolutions and the notices in accordance with state law, to put together a timetable that will guide us all through the process, and then ultimately we issue an opinion at the end of the bond issue that says, yes, these bonds are tax exempt, which allows people to, bondholders to buy your debt, okay? So on page 8, we'll just skip forward, page 8, as we just talked about, you all are probably very used to financing library needs through LERF, grants, and then another library pointed out to me today, I should say rainy day. My own library doesn't like to touch rainy day, so I left it off, but that's how you're used to doing it. The other way to fund projects is through your debt service fund, which was what Lisa was just talking about. You already, and you're lucky, because there are so many libraries who have let their old debt pay off, and you'll see in a minute why you're lucky to have debt outstanding. It's because you have a debt service fund tax rate on the books. Your taxpayers are already paying a tax, and you're not trying to add to the tax rolls or potentially not trying to increase what you're already asking for. So when we fund debt from the debt service fund, we issue a bond. So the next page, what is a bond? As a bond lawyer, I always get calls on Monday mornings from my partners like, my son was arrested over the weekend. Do you know how this bonding out process works? I'm like, that's not what I do. Or I got a roofer coming out. How do I tell if he's bonded? That's not what we do. What a bond is it's a true investment security. So I tell everyone, if you look at your PERF or TURF statement or your 401k statement and you see that pie chart where you have stocks and then you have bonds, they're investment securities. That's what a library does. So when we all go out and buy a home, we take out a mortgage with a bank. Public entities issue bonds. It's much like a mortgage. It's a debt that you repay over time. Okay. Bonds can be taxable or tax exempt. 99% of the work we do is tax exempt, which is why we're involved. So Lisa kind of talked about it. If we go back to her presentation, I think it was page 4. I'm trying to remember it.
Page. Yes.
The page 4?
3. I'm sorry. Page 3.
So Lisa, when she was giving her presentation on page 3, she talked about what we call constitutional general obligation bonding capacity. So again, there are 2 types of bonds, a GO or general obligation and a lease or a first mortgage bond. So every entity in Indiana, every public entity has this general obligation bonding capacity. And I think it's easier to understand with some history, but when our ancestors were coming over from all across the world, they were coming to Indiana to work on the railroad, or they were going to other states to work on the canals. What happened at that time is every city, town, county across the state of Indiana wanted the railroad to stop in their community. So what did they do? They were like, if I build it, the railroad will come. So they built these amazing communities, and the railroad didn't stop. So the federal government came in because they all filed bankruptcy. The federal government came in and said, states, you have got to set a limit on how much debt each public entity can have, whether it's a school, a library, a county, a city, a town. That's this capacity. How much debt can the library have in their names? And as Lisa said, your amount as of right now, based on current net assessed valuation, is that $5,010,000 number. As Lisa said, general obligation bonds are easier and cheaper because it's where the library literally issues the debt in your name. So it would be called the Peabody Public Library General Obligation Bonds of 2023. You are the only entity involved. Okay? So the library would issue the bonds, and those bonds would fund the construction or the renovation. Again, on page 11, I explain that this is quicker and cheaper. So if you go back and you're like, what did Kristen say? This explains why we like to use general obligation bonds when we can. But as you can imagine, I live in a town next to a small town called Fillmore, where their general obligation bonding capacity is $210,000. So as you can imagine, in the 1940s and 50s, these small communities and small libraries, some of your teammates, Mary, were like, how am I supposed to get a new roof if my general obligation bonding capacity is only $200,000? So we went to the Supreme Court and we tested another financing mechanism, which is called a first mortgage bond. And here's how this works. And you already have it, and this is described in pictures on page 12. We formed a nonprofit entity, which yours is the Peabody Public Library Leasing Corporation. So we formed that nonprofit entity, and they issue the bonds. So not the library, but your nonprofit entity. And those bonds are called, Peabody Public Library Leasing Corporation, ad valorem property tax, first mortgage bonds. So not general obligation, they're first mortgage. What happens when you do a lease bond, and this is under state law and it makes no sense, so let me explain it. What happens when you did this first lease bond was that the library had to sell this building to the building corporation. The building corporation then issues the debt, constructed the additions, but the library entered into a lease. You rent this building from that building corporation. That rent under state law allows you to levy the tax as the library. I know this is a lot of detail, but I want you to be able to understand, because oftentimes people are like, why would we ever transfer title in our building? Every public building in the state of Indiana is in the name of a building corporation almost. Because geo capacity is so small, you couldn't do a new building for $5 million. Okay? Leases. What does that mean though? It takes longer because we're going through formal board proceedings with your library. At the same time, we're going through formal board proceedings with your leasing corporation. We have title insurance, we have recording, we do a true mortgage on this property, so there are extra steps. So if you do a GO bond, we say it's 3 to 4 months. If you do, and that's just for the legal steps. If you do a lease bond, which that would be for your library right now, anything over that $5,010,000, it would take 5 to 6 months. So when you ask about timing, we always want to talk through our 2 types of bonds, because one takes 3 to 4 months, where the other takes 5 to 6 months. And we do them both all the time. The other thing I wanted to talk about starts on 14, and then I'm going to have you skip right away to 16, is taxpayer process. And there's a huge misconception that the state of Indiana is a referendum state. That if you want to take out debt, that you have to ask your taxpayers on a ballot initiative to allow you to do so. And that is not the case. So this first page 16 first explains what we look at when we're trying to determine what process would apply to a project. So we talked about type of bonds. Now we're going to talk about type or amount of your project. We are going to ask you, Lisa and I both, from the very beginning, what is the total project cost of what you want to do? When you work with your architect, or if Mary starts calling companies, she's going to get a hard construction cost. So she's going to be told, what do the bricks and mortar cost? What would it be right now to do a new roof on a building of this size with this type of incline? That's the number she's going to get, but we need more. Because your project will be over $150,000 and you'll be required to have an architect, there's also soft costs that are involved. So we have to know your hard cost, your soft cost, and then Lisa puts together the cost of issuance. Legal fees, financial advisory fees, recordings, title insurance, all of that. So when you think about your project, that's another thing as you're going through your list. You may know if you're in a construction specific business, or Mary has called, what things cost. But in a bond issue, because you're a public entity, it's going to be more. Okay, so keep that in your mind as you go through your list. The next page on 17 describes project thresholds for Peabody Public Library. You can do a project up to $5,815,000 without any formal taxpayer opposition process. We would still be transparent. We would still have the same number of meetings. We would still publish all the same notices, have the same hearings. But $5,815,000 or less, there's no formal taxpayer opposition. If you choose to do a project, the total cost of which is $5,815,000 or more, and you go into these next two buckets, what happens is the library will hold an additional hearing. At the end of that hearing, we'll publish a notice that says, hey, taxpayers in our district, we are going to do this project for this amount. It's going to increase your taxes or maintain your tax rate of X. If you wish to file a petition to require that this project be subject to referendum, which is the bottom box, or subject to petition remonstrance, which is the center box, total project cost, you have 30 days to file a petition with the county clerk. If 5% of your registered voters and taxpayers go to your clerk and say, I want referendum, or I want petition and remonstrance to apply to this project can't move forward unless you run a race or put a question on the ballot. What does run a race mean? We don't see these a lot in Indiana anymore because it's really divided communities. But what happens is we would publish another 30-day notice where proponents would get a yellow, it's a clipboard race, so yellow sheet from the clerk, and the opponents would get a blue one, and it's a race. And it's live, and you can see the signatures of everybody signing for or against, and there are so many that sign on both because they just don't know what to do. So let's play this out, okay? So let's get some examples. You want to do a $7 million total all-in project. That means you're in the second box. That means you're going to hold all your hearings that we always hold, publish all your notices, but you're going to hold one more hearing. At the end of that second hearing, we're going to publish a notice and wait 30 days to see if 5% of your registered voters or taxpayers go to the clerk and say that they want the petition remonstrance process to apply. The clerk has to certify that they're registered voters or taxpayers. If they certify back to this board that yes, 5% of your registered voters or taxpayers want the petition remonstrance race to apply, this board will decide, do you run the race? Or is this project, as it's described, is it it dead for 1 year. So even if you're petitioned, the board can say to the public, which we hear all the time, we heard you. We're not gonna do this. We don't wanna run this race. We know that you didn't want an addition for teenage rooms, you want X. So you don't have to run the race. Let's play it out with a $13 million project. Hold the same hearings, publish the same notices, held an additional hearing, publish a notice, you wait 30 days to see if 5% of your registered voters or taxpayers file a petition with the clerk to say they want this to go on a ballot, referendum ballot. Clerk certifies it back to this board decides whether or not to run a referendum, or if they say no, that project, as it was described to the public, is dead for 1 year. Let's play this out. You want to do a $4 million project. First box. You would hold all your same hearings, publish all your same notices, taxpayers would come and talk in those meetings, but there's no 30-day wait period. Any questions on this? Because I know it's a big misconception in the state that if you do anything, you have to go to referendum.
This is a question about that.
Yeah.
Just to, so the list of illustrative figures that we have here, Baker Tilly, those figures basically were, if I'm reading correctly, were selected in part because they showed, for example, a 5-year and 10-year payback that allowed a flat, relatively flat debt service schedule. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, not tied to anything else beside
So
numbers.
I guess I wanted to clarify that in the event that, let's say, we come up with a $4 million project, that while we would still be in the first box here, that would substantially increase the debt service that we would have to pay depending on the term of the bond.
Yes, depending on the
Okay,
term.
okay, all right.
But you can go out legally 20 years.
Right.
So you could, and you could have Lisa, as you all look through your projects, run numbers. And they do it even in $1 million increments, so you can see what each one would be.
And keeping that flat would hopefully then help ensure that we would not have to go back and collect taxes from our taxpayers. Okay, all right, that's that, and I'm sorry, Kristen, I know that was way off topic for you, but I wanted to tie those things together and make sure I was clear in my understanding. Anybody else did that?
Well, I was just gonna ask if every project every dollar has to be accounted for before the bond issue.
And do you mean by accounted for, you mean estimates, project
Yes.
estimates? Okay.
Everything has, yeah.
Yes. So, but not every dollar. So let me explain this because it's difficult. And we get these questions from the public all the time. They're always like, why don't you go out to bid first and then issue your bonds? Well, because there's a state law that says a library or any governmental entity or unit cannot enter into a contract if you don't have the cash on hand. So what we do is we work backwards. You'll come up with a list of projects that you want to do. You can kind of gauge what those will cost. Your architect will do an updated project budget almost monthly. Right now, we're doing it almost weekly with inflation. So they'll do that almost monthly. They'll give you an update as to where we are. We require them to build in contingencies on both the owner side and the design side. Lisa is going to estimate cost of issuance from talking with local counsel. If, for example, if you did a lease, she'd talk to local counsel about builder's risk. He'd go out and get a quote about title insurance. He or she would go out and get a quote. So it's a round number. It's not an exact number, but we go out to your public with the maximum. Once we have bids in hand and we're almost ready to sell bonds, we can issue lower, but we can never issue higher. So we're very conservative with the amounts. We ask your architect to be conservative too on contingencies and project scope budget amounts. Lisa's very conservative too on cost of issuance, just so we never have to go back to the public. We always say this will be the max, but we can come in lower.
Any other questions? Okay.
That was it.
Thank you.
No,
Sorry for the interruption.
And I'm gonna skip, if you would decide to do a project over that, 5,815,000, I'd be coming back because we would need to talk about all the rules and regulations, some of which are in here. But I wanna switch now to page 21 because so far we've talked about different types of bonds, which really should not come into your decision-making process. We just wanted you to know that there is ability to do both. The type of project and those thresholds that apply, I do think is important that you understand as you're going through your decision-making process. The other most important piece to understand for appointed boards such as yourselves is that before any appointed board can issue any bond, whether it's for $100,000 or it's a refinancing, you have to have fiscal body approval. And based on the parcel count that we did, that is county council approval.
That's what I have.
Yeah. So for you all, you would have to have county council approval of the bond issue. Mary, how many libraries are in Whately County? 3. I need to go back and look and see if we've been to the county council before. It's hard because the county council's not liable on your debt. They don't, if you would default, which you won't because this is a property tax levy, they are not liable. But that statute requires them to sort of sign off. So it becomes a really confusing process to all councils across the state because they're like, why do we have to do this? It just doesn't seem right. But they have to approve. So this is also where that timing issue comes into play. Usually the longest lead time is that you're hiring your architect, getting your architect to go through design development and then schematics. You know, as I said, it takes 6 to 8 months for that process. But this elected board approval in some library deals has taken us 18 months to get through. Because we have to make sure the county understands, and if there is a tax rate increase, we have to make sure that they understand what it is for, that they understand the value, that they understand, you know, how many different programs we have and those sorts of things.
So is that why it's a valuable thing for we looking at reissuing this so it doesn't go away and have to get it back?
Absolutely. Because right now, you would be going in to keep it neutral. If you waited till 2023 to issue, you would be going asking for a full increase. Yeah, because your debt would be paid off.
That's why that bump is so important.
That bump is
Because
so
that-
important.
That keeps your tax rate level. And so when you appear before the county, you can say,
Well, the yearly payments are less than we're paying now. This will, that's the part.
Oh, and those
Yeah,
other
yeah.
illustrations.
yes. And that's part of a function of again, the operating balance and how much you're allowed to keep in the debt service fund. That has recently been lowered by the state. So in the past, you could keep 50% of an operating balance of your debt service. Now that's been lowered to 15. So previously, you had more money to work with for your debt service. Now, you're at a very narrow margin. So we're taking maximum opportunity to maintain your operating balance and keep your debt service level and look at the tax rate. And keep in mind, all of these assumptions are based on your 2022 net assessed value. So if that bumps up again a little bit next year, we have a little bit more room for debt service. But if it goes down, you know, we have to make adjustments for that as well.
And you only have to have 51% of county council approval,
You have,
majority, or
yes, so it depends.
okay.
So you have to have a majority, depending on what rules your county council follows. We got into this required a majority of the quorum, but some say it should have been a majority of the board. This is not an ordinance, it is a resolution. And so we always now work with local counsel to ask county attorney to try to understand if there's any of those different kinds of rules, but generally across the board it's a majority.
And this is a question for the attorney. What if the library attorney is also an attorney?
We have that quite often. A lot of councils are comfortable with it. What happens is they advise the county on the resolution piece, but not on any of their specifics. A lot of times counties, especially where there is impacts from the circuit breaker or the tax caps, they also call in a financial advisor when the libraries go before them to say, is this true? One, is this debt not our debt? Does it not count against us? And then two, what would this do to the circuit breaker laws? So they often have their own sort of financial input as well.
So whatever we choose to do, we have to have at least earmark or spend 85% upfront to have at least 50% to increase it, or no?
And 50% balance.
Oh, no, that's an operating balance that the library is allowed to maintain in their debt service fund. And you can draw on the operating balance, for instance, let's say one of your tax distributions might be a little short or something like that. You can use that operating balance to make up the difference to make your debt service. That's sort of what it's intended for. Yeah.
So the dollar amounts that you're showing include that 15% balance.
Yes.
And the debt service for any potential bond issues. So that you can still have that safety net. Even though now it's 15 instead of 15. So if we go back to timing, and then I always try to think of another way to end this, but if we go back to timing, and they need to issue this year to protect their rate, that would mean we don't like to issue bonds later than, we don't like to sell them really later than that first week of December. So that would mean working backwards. We want to put in enough time to interview and hire architects. We want to put in enough time to make sure that we have our conversations with the council, which again, has fluctuated from some areas, it's 1 month, that's all we need, others it's been 18. And, yes, and so that's what I want to make sure as you think through the timing, it's really county by county, project by project.
Can I ask, where does it say elected board approval of bond issue? What does that mean?
So what the statute says is that when an appointed board, like a library board, wants to do a bond issue, they have to have an elected board sign off. So that's fiscal body.
That's what we were talking about.
Yep. So that's why it's either the county council or the city.
Chris, any other questions? They're here.
I know.
They're ready to answer questions.
Wonderful job. So as far as that goes, you said working backwards. We're looking at the next month or two to make a decision. Fair enough, fair enough.
Yeah.
And an amount that we want to work with.
Correct. And what most libraries would start to do right now in your case is, do you have a list of things, of needs?
Probably changes every
day.
day.
Yes.
I do have.
Yes. And so it's going through that list of needs and prioritizing them, looking at the tax rate impact and where you're comfortable, looking at the needs of your patrons. We hear right now all the time, meeting room space. Since COVID, we've heard a lot of just individual, like workspace. We've heard teenage rooms. We've heard that you are overwhelmed with other agencies asking for anything from parent meetings to Girl Scout meetings. Just what do your patrons need? And putting that list together, and then we are more than happy to send you the list of the architects that work across the state, and then interviewing them right away.
And it's $150,000 per job, or within the umbrella that we would have to, like, $150,000 total?
Public bidding laws and the case law says you can't artificially subdivide a project to avoid public bidding. So we would be looking at your whole project.
The whole thing?
Yeah. Now, that being said, sometimes you may have, and I don't know, we work with so many different types of libraries, and some of them you just have a director and that's it. Some of them have a maintenance staff that can paint or, help with tile or whatever. So if you had work that you could do in-house, you would still competitively buy product. Sometimes you can do some of that work in-house, depending on where you all are. If you had a maintenance person.
I just wanted to say, so if you guys recall, when we did our projects, we did them out rainy day, we moved money around, and then we also had primary engineering with the people that went ahead and took care of all the bidding process and took care of all of that for us. So, because we have done a lot. We have done a lot since 2015.
Anything else then? Is it okay with the board if I excuse these ladies so that they can get back out in that weather that they, oh wait, it's actually stopped raining.
Has it?
So-
I'm hoping on the way home I'll miss the line. But seriously, we know how hard this stuff is and we do it every day. We're happy to come up anytime, have Zoom calls anytime, any questions you can run through us. We know how hard it is, so please let us know whatever you need.
I am so glad I called you when I called you, because 1 to 2 months, guys, oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
No, as Chris was, as she was saying this, I was like, okay, so this is basically within the next 60 days. He's dropped that time. Yeah.
And if you look at your list and you say, oh, we're gonna need a little more than that, please feel free to just reach out and, we can certainly put new numbers together, just know. Okay.
If there is a big project too, we talked about all the needs now in our communities. You could also do a small bond issue now, and these could protect your rate for a few years.
Right.
And you could come back and do a larger project later.
That might be.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that could be,
That's why I was realistically looking at some of the figures you had given, those small figures, because I think there may be some smaller bites that we can take as we are
As you
contemplating
develop
some
it.
larger stuff.
yeah.
That's a very good strategy.
And if you, and if you have those also, like those redesign or addition projects, or just like the Library of the Next Century, your architect also, you can hire someone just to do a facility study, which Sarah in Wells County, she had a facility study done, and that's how they came up with their, what they could A, afford, and B, would meet their needs. And it's nice too, because it'll be like your HVAC's out of warranty in 3 years, and your roof's out in 10. It's nice to know that, and they color code it red, yellow, green for those that are out of warranty and those sorts of things.
And we did that with primary engineering.
Perfect.
I'm just reminding everybody.
Already you've done that?
Not for
This one.
For this one.
Okay, but,
Yes, we've done that.
awesome. Yeah, because that helps you too. But again, if you need anything at all, don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you so much.
Thank
This
you.
is
Thank
really
you.
helpful.
Very helpful.
And I hope you have safe trips home, because I know you're South Bend and you're Putnam County, but
Yeah.
Fillmore, is that?
Yeah, so we live in Coatesville, but we're close. I always talk about Fillmore because it's the Putnam County Museum, if you ever get to Greencastle.
That's just, yes, Greencastle, I went to DePaul, you didn't go to DePaul, did you?
No. So now you're probably gonna call me a townie, right?
I was not, a Wabash gentleman would not.
Oh, you were a Wabash, that's right, that's
Not
right.
referred to a Greencastle citizen.
I'm halfway between Wabash and
Okay.
DePaul. Oh, thank you guys so much.
Yes, thank you.
So much.
Thank you so much.
Oh, really?
Okay, and with that, we will get back onto the agenda. I guess for purposes of moving forward, Thank you again, Lisa. Thank you, Kristen. I will remind you that they did include some wish list stuff in here that Mary has worked on. I think these have been some comments that have been back and forth. And that I guess I'm going to ask that the next meeting I think we are going to need to make some decisions, presumably next meeting. So be thinking about some of those things and where we may want to go.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna ask, could we see a prioritized list, or?
Well,
I
I
want
think
you
we
guys
can,
to
but
help
I
do
think
that.
that's up to us.
Yeah,
Oh, I
yeah.
What I'm gonna, and that's, I'm sorry, look, what I'm thinking is, yeah, what we should do is, did one of these jump out at you? Did a couple jump out? And then what we could do is maybe try to assess some costs, or approach them and say, here's kind of what we want to do. We need some names as architects or an engineer to get decide depending on the project. It'd be lovely to do a branch in Corn Creek Township. That's the one that jumped out at me as the second largest metropolitan area in the county, and part of our tax base. That to me makes a huge amount of sense. However, I don't know that I want to do $5 million bond right now. I think those smaller bond issues sound better. I don't know that we need a $5 million facility in Corn Creek Township, especially if maybe what we may be looking at is something where we can just order books and send them out. Anyway, what I'm thinking is come back, use this as a template, but come back and let's talk about ideas and things that we may want to do.
I think that we need to really have some strategic thought into the political side of this, with who is going to have to approve this. Because I think the reality is that if we look at the composition, some people would rather say to people, some elected officials would rather say to people that they
Cut taxes.
cut their taxes.
Yeah, well, and
And
that's.
I think that's a very
Well,
real threat to
You're
us.
correct, Lori, but I hate to not even join. the
Absolutely,
fight
we
based on the
definitely
fact
need to join
that-
the fight, but that fight probably needs to start like tomorrow.
Well, that's, but also what I'm thinking about.
Honestly,
And that's correct, and we've lost some members of that body who used to say no to everything and anything that came across, but you are correct. And so, board members, you would want to familiarize yourself with your county council members and those who are representing your area specifically, and perhaps start to, yes, communicate some of these priorities.
Then looking at the list of items that we do, if we're prioritizing those as items that are, I'm trying to think, most politically beneficial. That's not really what I mean, but what it is those that are going to show the most benefit for the dollars that we're asking for. That hey, we're looking at replacing fluorescents because it's actually going to save money in the long run.
Correct.
Is a selling point, along with, hey, we're opening up and we're looking at moving into your area of the county, and providing more service for, bang for your buck.
Makes sense. Chris, did you think of something else?
I forgot to ask, I had made a note of it.
You know what? I'm sure that Mary has either one of their email addresses.
The only thing was if we issue the bond for the debt service, let's say maybe in 5 years, in 3 years, if we had to, again, or is this a one-time thing? I forgot to ask that.
I thought she said they could do a short term.
Yeah, we can do a smaller bond issuance now.
I mean, I know that we're prioritizing, but yet I don't know what is more in need between reglazing windows and new furniture. So I still would like some more guidance as far as,
And that may
input
be
from
a
Mary.
conversation directly with Mary
Yeah.
that we could have. So I see what you mean about the board. You're right.
Right.
And then especially, I hope it's okay because we're in a hurry now with, you're talking 60 days or whatever. It just seems to doing less now so that we're not rushing into bigger projects when we just started this and only had like 60 days or whatever. Seems more beneficial than trying to do something large that we rushed into.
Yes, that makes sense.
I think, Gary, we do need some feedback from you as to more detail. I mean, this is a great list, but. Oh, that's me walking around going, okay, there, okay, that, okay, that, okay, that.
Well,
Right.
she can't set the policy. She's not the
Exactly.
we are the policy people. So
Is
she could certainly say the windows are in worse shape than the lights. So she could prioritize some of those kind of things, and that would be helpful if you want to say, on a scale of, on some of these things, on a scale of 1 to 10, this, 10 being, this is low priority, we don't need it all. 1 is it's an absolute priority. You can do something like that with some of these things having to do with facilities.
Right.
Is that, would you need?
Yeah, and that's fine.
Or Mark, you could work with Mark on that, or?
Well, the other thing I wanted to let you know is some of those items are actually items taken from the report that was done by primary
Right.
engineering. So the halide lights,
Right.
read me the first 3, and I'm pretty sure those are right out of that
Large
report.
outside
Yep.
air duct.
Yep, the air duct thing, that's an
Yep.
HVAC thing, that's
Yep.
probably something that should be a priority.
So, those things, any of those, I think those are gonna be returns on our investment in making the library a better place, especially like resurfacing the parking lot, replacing the windows. We're going to get a return on efficiency in those things. That, to me, I'm all in favor of, because we're going to make the library more efficient, we're going to be less, in the long run, we're going to bring back some of those money.
And I think you could look back at our minutes and say, we've been concerned about our utility bills
Yeah.
over the last year, so
Like
we definitely have backing for that.
It's easy to put that forth as being a good steward of the funds too.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, do you folks want to have an extended or an earlier or a meeting next week or next, we'll have an extra special, we have a special meeting. Do you want to have a longer meeting after we have an opportunity to digest this? And just plan on having a 2-hour meeting next month?
Which is the
This
11th?
is second Wednesday, whatever that
It's
was.
May 11th.
Okay.
Yeah.
That
And
sounds good to me.
And it's not that I'm opposed to having more of a discussion right now, but I just
hold on, we'll prove
I just feel like we're just kind of spitballing right now without having an opportunity to look at things more.
I'll look
So
at that
why don't
and
we just
see if I can-
tentatively plan at least that may be an extended meeting for purposes of making some decisions.
Yeah.
In the interim, we as a board, and if more than 3 or 4 of us would want to talk, we are not allowed to do that about this type of business without violating the board law. However, up to 3 of us could do that. So if you want to contact any other individual board members, we do have email addresses for Mary with questions in the interim. I think that a lot of this thought process and footwork could be done outside, and I think it's going to have to be done outside the meeting, because other than that, we're just going to circle the drain.
Yeah.
So, with that thought, Mary, did you want to add anything? You look like, nope.
No, I'm good. I'm
Okay.
fine.
With that thought, I still need to have you review and take action regarding last month's meeting minutes. We have not even started our agenda, okay? So, and that's why I keep looking at the clock.
Make a motion to approve the minutes from last meeting.
Chris has moved to approve the minutes of the March 9th meeting. Is there a second?
Second motion, that.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the minutes to the March 9th, 2022 regular meeting, all those signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved.
I would like to note that I think that Mark would not be available on May 11th.
I'll be Paul Harder.
Okay.
It looks like there's a track meet, so
I don't know of any way to steer that different. I mean, I suppose we could change the meeting date, but
Yeah.
my fear is the way a lot of us have schedules worked
Right.
out that we may. So Mark, would you, certainly you can communicate your thoughts, email those to Mary, get those, we'd like to take those into consideration, okay?
Yes.
Director's report.
Okay, I'm going to go breeze through this because I'm sure you've already read it. I wanted you to be aware that the Michigan Constitutional Crusaders had been in town, but they did not stop by and visit us. The Friends of the Library, we're trying to attract more friends, so we've moved the meeting date. It's the same day, but it's in the afternoon for lunch. So, and the library currently is providing lunch for the Friends of the Library to see if we can increase numbers. And I'm just letting you know what we're doing. So, thank you. So, do you have any questions of me about that?
How many do we have right now?
That come regularly around 7 or 8.
Is that enough to staff book sales and everything like that?
We do get some help as far as moving things around. And then the staff, my staff even comes and helps with some of that stuff. So, but anyways, we're just trying to increase the numbers. Baker Tilly had that presentation, which was really helpful. I wish we had seen them back in 2016. That would have been helpful. I wanted you to be aware of the fact I did include an evaluation form that down the road, if you would choose to go to merit raises, the evaluation is able to meet that because we have things numbered. So just putting that on your radar. There are some things that staff, because they know they automatically will get whatever percent you decide, sometimes there's some hesitancy to perhaps take a little more classes or not be upset about having to do technology competencies or whatever. And I feel like that might be a way to give them more incentive. Okay. The Sunday hours, I'm just throwing that in there. A lot of libraries, I gave you a list of all the libraries that are now open on Sunday, and it has gone down significantly since the pandemic. The website. Basically, we have to rebuild the website. However, it is available. You can get to it. I can't guarantee all the links are fine. It was an issue with GoDaddy. And Beth is working her hardest. Beth and Rebecca. Yeah. So that's where we're at with that. And then the trustees meeting, I just wanted to let you know how that all transpired to the best of my knowledge. It will be here next week, 5 to 7. I think Nikki and Greg are going to represent Peabody. Haley's going to be here from the state. She's going to conduct the training. 7 from Cherubusco and 1 from South Whitley will be here. So that's all I have on that. I did want to let you know we're going to be losing our marketing person who's actually a contract. She's going to be, I asked her if she could stay through summer reading. Why I'm telling you all this is I'm going to probably have to hire somebody. And what I would like to do is do a professional assistant library marketer position. And that is adding a new position, and it's something I do have to ask permission for. So I didn't have that in my director's report. But it is something I'd like to take care of so I can advertise for the job. One other thing, Parkview wants to know if they can come in and do a survey, and I told them that no, we don't really allow surveys. We just never have, but I wanted to mention it to you to see if you think it's something I really should allow them to do.
I don't understand.
They want to come and do some sort of medical survey for Parkview Hospital.
Here?
Yeah.
On your staff?
Voluntary or?
No, for people coming in.
Oh, like they're gonna reserve space and do.
No, they will
No,
not be
they're
able
gonna sit at the
to.
door and.
That's what I said. I said, well, we aren't gonna, and I'm like, we really don't do surveys, but I'll talk to the board and see what they
Is this
say.
part of their community health assessment, like
Yes.
they do every couple of years?
I mean, this sounds nice, but then when the next not-for-profit or group that maybe,
Yeah.
not so great comes along.
And the next person was installed, right? He's or
I told him most likely no, but I have to call him tomorrow and let him know for sure. And I don't know why that's blowing up.
anyone want to move to approve that? Okay.
Okay, thanks.
No motion. Do you need a vote to? approve
Yeah, is it
creating
okay
a
for-
marketing
yeah.
position? Yeah, let's do
Okay.
that on, the fly. I guess I would seek a motion to create a new, is it a part-time or full-time?
It'll be a 24-hour position. They'll be called professional assistant / library marketer.
Okay, to create that position at a wage deemed appropriate and financially responsible by the executive.
So moved.
It's been moved by Lori, is there a second?
Mark, I'll second.
Mark, second. Moved and seconded to create a marketing position for 24 hours a week. Further discussion? And that would replace the contract person, right?
Correct.
Okay, so that's where we're not looking to get another contract person, we want someone honest.
Right, because all my contract people are actually people that used to work for us. And I'd rather have somebody that I train internally before I,
Yeah,
okay.
That
And-
makes sense, because
Any other questions or discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Okay, and just so you know, I did make sure that we can afford it.
Okay, I figured you did.
But no, I understand, I totally understand. The other thing I want to let you know, South Whitley has gone fine-free, and Allen County Public Library's gone fine-free for juveniles. So I'm just putting it out there, not for a decision at all, but for further discussion down the road. I think a fine-free for juvenile might be a smart thing to do.
as soon as the police department does, I will.
As soon as what?
As soon as the police department goes fine free, I will.
Okay.
That's fine. Okay, what else, Mary?
I think I covered everything else.
Okay.
So we just have to pay the bills.
With that, then we will look at the financials and the claims. Is there any question regarding the financials? It looks like that NIPSCO bill is still way up there, and especially over the trending, I mean, it looks like, but it did look like every now and then there was a couple years where it was really high, and I know some of the rates have gone up, but whether that's just a weird combination of weather, we're not aware of or suspect any leak or problem, right?
We
I
got
know.
new,
It's all been
it's
replaced.
all brand new, right?
Yeah, I mean, we replaced.
That is odd.
Well, and I did know, I remember I went back and I found where they said, yes, the rates are going to go
Mhm.
up, but it seems really significant. I guess we'll just keep an eye on it, because I keep expecting it to come back down
Mhm.
to something that looked like some of the years past.
I mean,
That's
I-
mainly heat,
Is-
right?
Correct.
Is there a way that we can have NIPSCO come out and audit that, or? would not
I
do
think
that?
it would probably be a smarter move for me to see if the people if Lochinvar can come out and do a test to see, because they're supposed to be high efficiency.
It would be worth it. I mean, we are spending
Yeah,
thousands, I mean, even if that's going to cost us $1,000 to find that out, it is pretty significant.
Okay, well, I can check into that. However, I'm honestly not surprised. I mean, to me, the numbers, this past, it wasn't as high as it was. I mean, the highest one we had was in January,
Right.
right?
February, yeah.
It was February, okay.
I mean, even if you look back to like 2019, I mean, if you look 2020 and even part of 2021, chances are maybe those dollar amounts were lower because we weren't open as much because it was the pandemic. But if you go back to early 2019, I mean, we are still double. Those
Mhm.
bills are double what they were when we were at
Yeah.
the same capacity.
We've
as what
almost
we are.
spent as much in these 3 months as we had all that a year.
Mhm. But we do remember the one year that we had zero balances because, yeah. So,
That's what I was wondering about, the efficiency of the windows, doors, those types of things, because they're getting older, so.
no, I'll go ahead and see what I can do to have some sort of study done on the furnaces.
Thank you.
Beyond that, any other questions about financials or specifically about the claims that have been submitted? Hearing no questions or concerns, I would entertain a motion to approve the claims as submitted.
So moved.
Lori has moved to approve the claims as submitted. Is there a second?
Nikki seconds.
Nikki seconds. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the claims as presented, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Approved.
This is some kind of form.
With that, I'm going to ask if there are any other thoughts about presentation or any other business. Chris, anybody else?
The SWOT survey?
Oh, the survey that they completed, the online?
Yes. I thought I took care of that unless anyone else did as well. The survey?
Yeah.
Mary sent back, yes?
Yeah.
I thought I took care of that. I did on my phone.
Oh, I did too, and then it said only one trustee.
Yeah.
So I was surprised, I was
Oh,
like,
it still
man.
says only one trustee, because I did it too.
I did it
Well,
today.
Okay, well, I'll contact her and see if she's got an extra, but when
But I did it on my phone too.
Because I did it when I got it.
But I don't know, was there a place to identify yourself as a trustee?
Yeah, there's a checkbox.
Okay.
Oh, well, I should have done that.
okay, well, I will.
There, I will tell you, I did it, it sounds like most people did it, so, but we may have forgotten to, when he said that, I'm like, I don't know if I checked the box that said I was a trustee, because now
It was
we're.
right at the top.
Was it?
Every question was required, so.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I don't know if I put trustee or community member, chairwoman.
Well, I mean, technically you're both, but.
Yeah.
Right.
yeah.
Whatever you decide to identify as.
Okay,
but-
but-
best answer, Chris, it's the best answer, we were looking, there may be more than one that's correct. We're looking for the best answer,
60% of each pass.
Anything else? Would entertain a motion to adjourn, do not leave it to the assigned paper.
Next one.
Twice.
Yeah, you sign.
Do I need a date?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
If you sign both, I'm okay.
Nikki moved to adjourn,
Second the motion.
and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Do wait until you've signed the.